JavaServer Pages is the subject of today's lecture. What we shall do is introduce the JavaServer Pages concept and show you how to write some pages. You'll have noticed, no doubt, that there are problems with Java servlets when it comes to sending HTML to the web browser. The problem is not technical, it's really one of easiness of use from the programmer's point of view. It's a real pain in the neck, really, to have to embed HTML text as part of a string. So you have, for example, out.println, and then as you start putting in your HTML tag, you then find that you need a double quote, and therefore you have to put in a backslash to make sure that it escapes that double quote to make it part of the string. And so it can be rather awkward to do this. One of the very nice things about JavaServer Pages is that HTML can be embedded naturally, exactly as if you were writing it in an HTML file. Now, the JavaServer page lifecycle begins with writing the JSP code as an ordinary text file. And the text file has got a .jsp extension. It contains a mixture of JSP code and HTML, which is embedded in it. And then we will save that file in the web folder of the NetBeans project. When that file is first requested by a client, a few things happen. The first thing is that the JSP will be converted automatically into a Java servlet. So our file that we might call x.jsp now becomes x.java. It is then converted as a servlet. Now that servlet will have been automatically generated by basically the servlet container. Then, of course, as with any ordinary servlet, the next stage is for the servlet to be compiled. And so we end up with an x.class file. And having been compiled, that class is now loaded, ready for execution as a servlet. That's what happens on the very first time the JSP is requested. When that file, that JSP file, has been requested a second or third or any other number of subsequent times, then the servlet container will first check to make sure that the JSP file has not changed since last it was converted into a servlet. If it has not changed, then all that happens is that the compiled class file will be executed. On the other hand, if there have been changes, then the changed JSP file will have to be converted again by generating a new servlet file, and that new servlet file will then have to be compiled again. And then the new version of the compiled servlet is executed. Of course, that process of converting the JSP to a servlet and then compiling the servlet, that takes time. And therefore, we don't want our users to have to experience that delay. But of course, if you're being professional about this, your users will never see a servlet that has not been used before. Because what you will do as a dedicated professional is to put your JavaServer page onto your system, and then you will test it. And as part of that testing, you will have to request it, which means that it will be converted to a servlet and then compiled. And therefore, your users should never, ever see that particular delay that goes through on the first request. So the JSP file structure, very simple. On the very first line, we'll put something like this, which indicates that this is a page whose language is Java, and in this example what we're going to do is to output text, which is HTML. And then the rest of the file can be, well, it can be whatever we need it to be. It could be just HTML, but that is absolutely pointless, because if all you're going to do is write HTML in there and nothing else, you might as well use an HTML file, because the HTML file doesn't have to go through the process of being converted to a servlet and then compiled. On the other hand, you might have only Java code in there, and that's possible. But again, that's almost pointless, because if you're going to do that, then you might as well simply write a servlet, because then you don't have to go through the process of converting a JavaServer page into a servlet. You might as well write the servlet directly. And therefore, the whole point of JavaServer Pages is that we mix Java code and HTML. So here's an example. We've got on the first line here that standard line to introduce the page. And then we've got something, I'll give you the proper name of this a little bit later, but it's a tag essentially that says this is Java code in the JSP file. So the less than % starts the Java code and the % greater than terminates the Java code. And you can have as many of these as you want. What we've got here is a piece of Java code with then some embedded HTML. And it's quite possible that we'd want to put some more Java code in between some of this stuff. And that's okay, we can do that. Examples of that will follow. What we've got here is essentially a shorthand way of putting in a piece of Java code that says out.print and then, in this case, message. More about that in a while.